The matatu from Kisumu Junction was packed tight, heat and voices moving together like a single loud thing, when Lindy flicked her bottle and a neat arc of water hit McKenna full in the belly. For a second the bus went quiet in the way crowded places do when something small and cruel interrupts the ordinary. McKenna steadied herself, fingers along her shirt, eyes wide not with anger but with tired surprise. Lindy laughed at first, the kind of laugh that says you do not expect consequences. A passenger near the window lifted a phone and held it steady. Someone said, "What did you just do?" and the camera kept rolling as McKenna asked for an apology and Lindy waved it off. The uploader did not wait. He cut the clip, wrote a line, hit post, and the small violence became a bright thing on every screen. Notifications multiplied like sparks. People stopped scrolling. Some wrote fierce words and tagged the bus company. Others shared McKenna's face with concern and the word pregnant. The clip landed on radio feeds, passed between WhatsApp groups, and slipped into the feeds of people who had nothing to do with Kisumu until that moment. The city turned the sound up on one small act and watched it travel, the way a dropped stone makes circles far from its origin. In minutes the bus camera, another clip from a market, and a dozen hot takes stitched together a larger story, and what started as a careless flick became the first public beat of a wider storm. Alma arrived at the radio studio with her shawl wrapped tight and her market voice ready. She had sold tomatoes in Mavuno Market for 20 years and she knew how to speak so people would listen. When the host asked about the bus video, she laughed at first and said her daughter would never do such a thing. She called McKenna a liar without naming her. She said young people today are quick to blame and slow to learn. Alma spoke fast, proud, certain that her words would close the story. But the world outside the studio had already seen the video. The clip moved from phone to phone faster than any one person could follow. People who knew Alma saw her on the radio and then watched the clearer clip again. At the market a customer stopped, showed another customer, and soon the small stall lanes hummed with the same short, angry sound you hear when a rumor becomes real. Women turned from their scales and the men who buy in bulk left baskets untouched. The stall where Alma usually stood started to feel empty. Regular customers whispered. Some walked away without buying. Neighbors who liked to chat at the gate now pulled their faces tight and kept walking. At first Alma kept saying the same words, "My child would not, my child would not." But the more she spoke, the worse it sounded. People played the video in the background of their calls and held their phones up at the market, watching Lindy laugh as the water hit McKenna. Some watched the later clips too, where Lindy had mocked other women and where a chat showed laughter at someone else's shame. A group of young men from the neighborhood came to the market looking for answers. They did not shout at first. They moved like a tide, circling, asking questions, naming times and places. Alma felt their eyes like cold coins. A neighbor shoved a small pile of plaints onto her stall counter and said, "We want an apology." Customers that used to wait in line left without a word. The radio host called back and Alma tried to repeat her defense, but her voice broke on live air and she had to step away. Sitting behind the stall, hands that once weighed fruit now trembled while she replayed the video in her head. Pride that had been loud and full grew thin. Her friends stopped bringing tea. The market that had been her kingdom emptied in bits, like sandals left on a leaking roof. For the first time she thought of Lindy not as a pill to swallow with pride but as a child who had done something visible and ugly. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the slow, heavy sound of a life changing, of a small, proud house starting to crack from the inside. McKenna did not fall apart. She sat on the edge of her bed, hand on her belly, and recorded a short reply that felt like a line drawn in the sand. She introduced herself in a soft voice and said she was a midwife from Reby village. She spoke slowly so every word landed clear. She named what had happened. She said the water hit her stomach and that it could have hurt her baby. She did not shout. She did not beg. She asked for one simple thing, an apology from the girl who had thrown the water and from anyone who helped make that moment public without care. Then she said something the city could not ignore. She said she was due any minute. Her face was steady, not dramatic, and there was an honest tiredness in her eyes that made people listen. In 30 seconds she built a small bridge between the quiet of her life and the noise on the internet. The clip spread fast because it felt real. People who had only seen the laugh and the splash watched her and felt their anger change shape. They saw a woman who cared for others, who knew birth and risk, and who asked only for respect. Mothers shared it first, then nurses, then men who remembered their own mothers. Messages of support poured in. Some called the bus company. Some wrote to the radio station. Others posted the clip with words like "apologize now" and "respect pregnant women." The tone of the comments moved from outrage to a firm demand. Sharing the clip did not stop at sympathy. It turned into pressure. Community groups posted about looking into the driver and the matatu, and online fundraisers began for McKenna if she needed help. Local reporters shifted their angle. They wanted to hear from the midwife who had spoken plainly. The calm in McKenna's voice made people feel ashamed of cheering at cruelty. Her short reply gave others a script to follow. More people began to speak up about small humiliations they had taken for granted. In markets and buses and school gates, the story moved from gossip to consequence. The 1,000 small acts of sharing and tagging became a force that pushed institutions to answer. Through a 30-second message, McKenna changed the story from a viral prank into a call for responsibility. She did not seek fame. She wanted safety for her baby and respect for every woman who walks into crowded places carrying more than the eye can see. That simple demand, made steady and clear, made a city look at itself. Once the first clip spread, others began to surface fast, like doors opening one after another. Young people with phones who call themselves citizen journalists started to look for more video and found it. A security camera near the market showed Lindy earlier pushing a woman aside, laughing as if it were a joke. A school gate camera caught her shoving another girl on a different day. A neighborhood WhatsApp group produced a short voice note where Amma said the whole thing was blown out of proportion. The pieces fit together in a slow, terrible puzzle. Then someone leaked a screenshot from a chat where a small group had joked about making a show on the matatu to get laughs, even sending a plan for where to sit and who would film. Seeing those messages changed how people felt. This was not a single careless moment. It looked planned, and that made the outrage sharper. Citizen journalists stitched the clips into a longer timeline and posted it with clear captions so anyone scrolling would see the pattern. The matatu company could not ignore it. At first they posted a short statement, saying they were concerned and would investigate. That answer landed badly next to the clear video. Under pressure, and because passengers and neighbors called the office, the company took a stronger step and suspended the driver who had allowed filming on the bus and who had not stopped the harassment. That decision was small but important. It showed institutions could be pushed to act when evidence was plain and many people looked on. Online, the clips turned into a campaign. A hashtag began to rise, simple and sharp, and people used it with anger and with requests: call the bus company, support McKenna, and name any witnesses. The hashtag gave strangers a place to gather their shock into a single voice. Reporters used the timeline the citizen journalists had made, and TV shows replayed the now longer video while callers shared their own stories of being humiliated in public. Local activists started to organize a peaceful meeting by the market to ask for apologies and for better rules on public transport. The pressure felt like a crowd moving toward one goal. It was no longer about a single bottle throw. It was about patterns, about systems that let people film and laugh at others, and about how a few short messages and a few camera angles could build a court of public opinion strong enough to force real action. The leaking of chats, the released camera footage, the suspended driver, and the overnight hashtag made one small act of cruelty into a full public reckoning. News of the videos made people sit up, and the heat turned toward Lindy's family. Her fiancé Temba was angry in a way that felt like a promise. He was the counselor's son, and he started to use the names his family knew. Messages came to people who had spoken out. Witnesses who had been ready to tell what they saw began to get calls from unknown numbers. Someone threw stones at a young man who had posted one of the clips. A few texts threatened to expose the personal details of people who had shared the videos. It was clear the aim was to scare people quiet. Temba also went to the radio station and demanded retractions, and his father whispered to market leaders that trouble would come to those who humiliated their family. The crowd that had formed online now had a shadow following it, and some of the early anger shifted into fear. McKenna felt the change, but she would not be pushed back into silence. She knew what it meant to protect life, so she protected her own truth. She called a women's rights lawyer in the city and asked for help. The lawyer sat with her, checked the clips, and told McKenna the steps she could take. They filed a formal complaint at the local office, naming the harassment and the threats. The paper trail mattered more now than loud protests. The lawyer also reached out to a trusted reporter and explained that McKenna wanted safety, not revenge, and that any attempt to intimidate witnesses must be recorded. Word spread that McKenna would be open and visible, and that made it harder for quiet threats to work. Volunteers from the village offered to come to the hospital when she went in to give birth. Midwives and community elders promised to stand with her. When contractions began, McKenna asked the lawyer to call the press. She wanted cameras at the hospital door not to celebrate pain but to show that she was not alone and to protect the process of birth from being turned into a private battle. The media arrived, steady and serious, and their presence put a public frame around what happened next. Temba and his allies tried to block the story, but the complaint, the witnesses who had already spoken, and the growing public attention made it risky to move in the dark. In small ways the counselor's influence dimmed under the light of facts and many eyes. McKenna's calm choice to go public, to work with a lawyer, and to invite others into the room of her labor changed the balance. What started as a whisper of power and brief threats became a test of whether force could silence truth when a whole community decided to watch and bear witness. The courthouse filled with a quiet that felt like the moment before rain, because everyone had already seen the videos and now they wanted the truth written down. McKenna sat facing the judge with her hands folded and the baby safe in her arms, calm in a way that carried more power than shouting. The hearing was live-streamed so people who could not come in person watched on small screens and in groups at markets and shops. Neighbors stepped forward one by one and told of small cruelties they had seen, a shove here, a laugh there, messages that joked about making someone the butt of a joke. The citizen journalists played the clips in order, and each new piece fit into the pattern they had already suspected. The leaked chat was read aloud so everyone could hear how the plan had been joked about and shared. Even the Matata driver, called to explain why he had allowed filming and laughter, could not stand the clear timeline of events. Alma went to the stand and tried to defend herself the way she had on the radio, saying she had only been protecting her family. But the video and the witnesses left no soft place for those words to land. Her voice began firm and ended thin. People who had once given her nods at the market watched her face and felt something shift. The counselor's presence in the gallery did not change the facts. Temba's threats were read into the record, and those who had received the calls came forward to say they felt afraid. The judge listened, looking at the evidence and at the faces of those who came to tell what they knew. McKenna spoke in a clear, steady voice about the risk to her pregnancy and about the dignity she expected from her neighbors. She did not ask for revenge. She asked for safety, for an acknowledgement, and for a change that would stop others from being humiliated in public. Her calm way of speaking made it easy for people watching to see the harm as something real and avoidable. The ruling reflected that clarity. The judge found that the actions were cruel and that the planning shown in the chat made the wrongdoing worse. He ordered community service for those involved, a payment of damages to McKenna for the harm and the public stress she had suffered, and mandatory counseling for Lindayo and Alma so they would confront why they had chosen to hurt another person. The judge also warned the Matata company to review its policies and to train drivers and staff on passenger safety. The decision was not an end to hard feelings, but it changed the tone of the town. People left the court talking less about gossip and more about rules and repair. For McKenna the ruling was a kind of justice that offered room to breathe and to keep doing the work she loved. For Amma it was the beginning of a new and harder work, one that required listening and change. The live stream that had started as a moment of anger ended with many people deciding that public shame was not enough and that repair, not only punishment, mattered. Lindy felt the weight of what happened in small, sharp ways. School called and said she would be suspended, classmates who once laughed with her now turned their backs, and messages filled her phone with anger she could not answer. Rumors followed her home and teachers said she must sit out classes until she learned better behavior. Amma's life at the market changed too. Regular customers who had stood with her for years picked up their baskets and walked to other stalls. A quiet boycott grew so that Amma's table of tomatoes and greens sat thin, and neighbors who once brought her tea began to nod and move past without stopping. Shame lived in a space where pride had been, and both women found themselves facing people they had once thought would always be on their side. Meanwhile McKenna held a new kind of hope. The baby came healthy and strong, a small girl with her mother's steady eyes. The hospital smelled of soap and flowers and the sound of another woman crying with joy. McKenna named her daughter with a name that meant new light, and when she looked down at the baby she felt a soft, fierce resolve. With the money from the settlement she did something clear and practical. She cleared a small room, bought basic supplies, and started a free prenatal clinic where expectant mothers could come and be checked without worry about cost. Word spread quickly in the village. Women who had once only whispered about clinics and fees now brought other women and brought food for the volunteer midwives. Young men who had joined the online campaign turned up with paint and tools. Local nurses offered time on their days off. The clinic became a place of steady work and soft laughter, a place where mothers met and learned to hold their bellies as something precious and not a target for cruelty. Online, the story of the clinic joined with other videos of mothers helping each other, and someone edited a montage. Small hands washing, elders teaching, babies being weighed, a mother tying a wrapper with care. The montage traveled far, and people in other towns and other countries watched it and shared it. Donations arrived, not just money but books, blankets, and promises to start clinics like McKenna's. The village that had been split by a single cruel act found new ways to come together. Lindy and Amma had to face consequences, and they had to work for repair. McKenna's clinic gave others room to heal, and what began as a scandal slowly became a story about care, about how many small acts by many people can turn shame into healing. Months later Amma stood at the clinic gate with her shawl folded tight and her eyes full of the kind of shame that makes you small. She had walked from the market that morning, past empty stalls and familiar faces that looked away, and come carrying a small bundle of tomatoes and a list of repairs she wanted to help with. When McKenna saw her at the gate she did not step back. She opened the door and let Amma in, but she spoke calmly and set clear terms. If Amma wanted forgiveness she had to show humility, do the work, and make real restitution. No speeches, no excuses, just quiet work that helped mothers and babies. Amma agreed, voice soft, and for weeks she scrubbed floors, swept the yard, and learned to hold a baby without fidgeting. She listened at the clinic table while midwives taught mothers how to check a baby's breathing and how to spot danger signs. The work was slow and honest and sometimes painful, but people began to watch a different story. The clinic filled with newborns and soft cries, and the rooms held the steady light of people who had chosen repair over revenge. Outside, the hashtag water washed away kept moving across phones and screens. The tag linked the first angry videos to the new images of nurses teaching and babies being weighed. It pulled in stories from other places and turned private shame into public learning. Donations came and a teacher from another town sent books, a seamstress sent blankets, and volunteers came to help build a small room for mothers to rest. The region felt changed because the cost of cruelty had been shown and because people had chosen to do something better with what followed. Lindy and Amma had to live with their choices, and McKenna kept doing the work she loved. In the end the scene cut between the clinic's first newborns and a trending tag, and what the cameras held was a simple truth: one careless act can hurt many, but many small acts of care can heal more.